Leadership is essentially a five-dimensional representation of aspiration, agility, anticipation, authenticity, and ability in that order. The aspiration of freedom can afford power in every sphere of life, but not the ambition of power. Mahatma Gandhi is a sterling example of a leader who epitomized political leadership that sought power for everyone, while all politicians choose electoral politics for personal power. There is nothing wrong with personal power as long as it is shared, is it? The first and most important dimension of leadership is aspiration. Gandhi's baptism into political leadership was born out of the discrimination he faced in South Africa. He was a failure as a lawyer, but his battle with every inhibition and challenge at a personal level manifested onto a larger canvas of life itself. His target was freedom, not just from the British in India, but rather the very mindset of slavery that prevented Indians from deserving what is right. Despite the British leaving the country, are we any better as a society that cherishes its freedom? It is Homi J. Bhabha and his agile leadership that has made India the nuclear power it is today. And that is mainly due to the audacious agility of formulating a strategy of focusing on extracting power from the country's vast thorium reserves rather than its meager uranium reserves. This thorium-focused strategy was in marked contrast to all the other countries in the world. The approach proposed by Homi Bhabha to achieve this strategic objective became India's three-stage nuclear power program. He established the infrastructure and built the talent to focus on the subject of nuclear physics that has given rise to generations of talent in the field. And this is a sterling example of agility. Anticipation without aspiration and agility is absolutely useless. Mahendra Singh Dhoni was a master at anticipation, but that just didn't drop from heaven. He brought on relatively unknown bowler to bowl the decisive final over in the inaugural T20 World Cup that India won. Even though Yuvraj Singh was in the pink of form in the tournament, in the 2011 World Cup final, Dhoni promoted himself ahead of Yuvraj when quick wickets fell and steadied the innings and steered India to a memorable victory with a six. Such anticipation in situations manifests in leadership who know how to live in the moment and take accountability for their actions. Swami Vivekananda advocated spiritual leadership, fighting against biased thinking. A strong believer in the Advaita philosophy, which epitomizes the oneness of God and self that was propagated by Adi Shankaracharya, he presented yoga and Vedanta to the world with authenticity. He didn't perceive a need to attire himself any differently to the expectations of the world, nor did he succumb to the religious dogma of the doubters of the times to travel for the causes he believed were important to serve in the interest of humanity. His vision of shining a light on philosophies that would benefit humanity was globally relevant, and thanks to him, will remain so for ages to come. Abul Pakir Jainulabdin Abdul Kalam was an Indian aerospace scientist and statesman who served as the 11th President of India from 2002 to 2007. He was born and raised in Rameshwaram, Tamil Nadu, and studied physics and aerospace engineering. He spent the next 4 decades as a scientist and science administrator, mainly at the Defense Research and Development Organization and Indian Space Research Organization, and was intimately involved in India's civilian space program and military missile development efforts. He thus came to be known as the Missile Man of India for his work on the development of ballistic missile and launch vehicle technology. He also played a pivotal organizational, technical, and political role in India's Pokhran II nuclear tests in 1998, the first since the original nuclear test by India in 1974. He executed his role with ability, deftly handling various political regimes and successfully staying away from the news and gossip mills, and yet became the president of the country. A man who believed in work ethics, whether he was a scientist or the president of the country. His humility and simplicity never deserted him, and his ability to execute his vision was the courage and conviction of his dreams for the country. In this episode on leadership, we use the lens of Santosh Babu to peer into the topic. He is the founder and CEO of OD Alternatives and Orglens. Over the years, from being a teacher in the northeast regions of India to being a facilitator of change for all types of organizations worldwide, Santosh has seen them all. A silent observer of human behavior, he has institutionalized leadership coaching and now working on understanding and course correcting adaptive behaviors in organizations.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you again.
Can you speak a little bit about ODA and Orglens?
So around 1998, so it's almost 25 years ago, I started this firm called OD Alternatives, primarily to work with both profit and non-profit sector in the area of organizational change and leadership. The fact that I've been here doing this for the last 25 years, I got lucky to work with some of the great people across the globe in their organization's change and transformation journey. And I also got lucky to be a coach to some of the senior leaders in the corporate world, and also outside. For example, I coach somebody from Bollywood. So a lot of my learning has been from people whom I helped, and I learned leadership from them. Though they came to possibly learn leadership from me, what happened is the other way around.
You are a published Wiley author as well. Can you give us an insight into that journey?
Long time ago, when I was working with organizations, a strategy consulting firm told me that you must coach the CEO, where we were doing some work together. And then I deep dived, what did they mean by coach the CEO? While they might have meant something else, when I dwelled deeper, I understood the philosophy of coaching. I wanted to, and I felt it suits me as a human being, and I went and trained myself. And I started India's first coach training program. And I found that it could be a good idea to write a book because there wasn't a single book on coaching. So I wrote and Wiley published that, a book called Coaching, the Art of Developing Leadership. The idea was to just popularize among multiple target groups what coaching is, how does it work, and what is it they could do with that. Yeah.
Let me lower you into the pit. Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela. How would these leaders succeed in their leadership today, as opposed to how they succeeded in the times that they lived?
So one of the thumb rules which I felt in leadership, there is a context and a situation that demands you to take action. So there is a context and an opportunity. Each time when the world is going through certain situations, a hero appears, or a god, or whoever it is. So the context that shaped leadership is important, and in current context is different. But if those three were living today, I am sure that they would figure out ways to deal with the current context instead of what probably they did at that point of time. So the action can change based on the context.
Stringing this with the contemporary leader, Barack Obama. So he wrote The Promised Land. He had great aspirations for North America and the world at large. How do you see success and failure? How do you see outcomes of leadership impacting society?
See, many a time when we think about impact, we get into a very kind of a Newtonian physics and try to create cause and effect at a singular linear fashion, which is what the Newtonian physics did. There is a cause and effect, and I'm looking at. So when we think about impact, it is never linear on one thing that happens. For example, Gandhiji. During that time that India got independence, there are at least other 20 countries got independence from Britishers. Right? So there are multiple other situations working at the same time, and the leader triggers certain things. And if the other things were not happening around, whether it's in the case of South Africa, but any action that a leader take, that obviously has an impact. But a collective impact of what we are trying to do, the leader possibly is triggering something which has a kind of a multiplier effect, and multiple other things are working. So fundamentally we need to move from looking at impact from a very cause and effect singular unidirectional thing. It's complex systems in that process. So even if the larger impact, whatever we are, just imagine if larger impact is done, we will all pack our bags and finish, right?
Right.
So a painter paints something big and think that this is going to be my masterpiece, and the moment it is finished, the painter thinks that not this, there is something more. So history is cyclic, it will keep moving. So point one, all of them had impact. Point two, did they solve world's problem? No, it will not. It will continue going. And the next, and that allows you and me to take some action
Right.
in our humble way.
Their aspiration was for the larger part of the world, and there had to be people who had to take on that relay. One of the greatest things about leadership is mobilization. They never singularly arrogated upon themselves that position of leadership. To them, they created more leaders.
Yeah.
Right? And there was a chain. And that chain needed clarity, which is what they provided. Do you think that that clarity exists today? And therefore, the counter question is the aspiration in our society enough to sustain a transformative change that is so required for a sustainable planet?
See, when we look at aspirations, the fundamental perspective, from an animalistic perspective, there are two aspirations for any animals. One, I need to survive. It's a fundamental aspiration. And an extension of that, I not only have to survive myself, I need to make sure that my next generation is there. So animals die in the process of trying to make sure they have a next generation. It is a high aspiration which is there. So two big things that is there is that survival of the species and making sure that my next generation also survive. So that's what Max and Freud did. Yeah? One talked about the stomach and one talked about what is below the stomach. Both are important for survival. Now we talk about a concept called a higher aspiration. As evolved human beings, is our aspiration just about survival? There's nothing wrong with that. And just about creating the next generation? What can be a larger aspiration? But many larger aspirations also will have a direct impact to survival. For example, if we talk about climate change, it can be a larger aspiration. Equitable society can be a larger aspiration. But it will boil down to this fundamental two things,
Right.
which was there in animals also, that I need to survive. Not only I need to survive, I also need to make sure that my next. A lot of things around climate change and other things, you know that maybe in yours and my lifetime, we might not have an issue. The sea is not going to come and, take over Bangalore.
Right.
But we do worry that Are we handing over a planet to our children the way we got it? So aspiration is there. And then we divide that into a lot of people will have individual personal aspirations. And then there is a collective common good aspiration. But whatever leadership frameworks that you take, that aspiration is the biggest building block. And most beautifully, it is depicted by somebody who is not a leadership thinker, is someone called Joseph Campbell, who studied mythology. And most of the movies, actually popular movies, are written on his formula. So he says that first thing is, there is a call for action. And leaders accept that call, and that's always something bigger than myself. So that is where you need to categorize aspiration.
Right.
Is my aspiration is about myself to make more money for me? There's nothing wrong with that. Or is it a collective good, something bigger than myself? So you're right. So aspiration becomes a single most important building block for leadership action.
Right. There is almost a shamefulness, or people being ashamed of speaking about aspiration or narrating about aspiration, and that is actually impacting the ability to prepare for the future, which is the agility, which is the second building block, if you may, of leadership.
Yeah, you're right. There are a couple of reasons for that. Because one, I can have an aspiration in my mind, but when I share that aspiration to the world, I say language is a leadership act.
Right.
What if I look at that camera now on the lens and say to the world that this is my aspiration? Then I'm putting something out to the world, right? And there are people then who will hold me responsible for that.
Right.
So our own ability to put something, it's almost like, okay, we will land a man in the moon by the end of this decade. It's an aspiration. And they never knew how.
Yeah.
To me, a real aspiration is when you don't know how. When you know how,
Exactly.
there is a path to it. Not. So you're right. So the ability for common people to stand up and stand on a future possibility and announce to the world that I'm standing on this future possibility. I don't see much, but I do have strong faith that that's in the DNA of human minds. Maybe, as I said, there is paradox, there is improvement in one area. So it could be easier for a company to say that, okay, we are trying to figure out if I can send you to Mars and settle there before solving the problem Earth is having.
Right.
And once that mindset change, then our willingness to stand on a larger possibility and announce to the world would increase. Yeah. We do hear those aspirations, but my question is, are they the relevant ones? Or are they just shaped by a few percentage of the people who live in this world?
Your calendar perhaps is something like 4 different continents in a single month. Do you see any changes between, let's say, decades, across decades? So how is it post-pandemic decade versus the pre-pandemic decade? Just that one comparison.
When the pandemic came, and when I was going through that, I thought this would really shape the way we think and the way we live, and would have a tremendous impact on actions of people. Like, for example, great literature happened during world wars.
Right.
Music. And I thought there could be a boom like that. Maybe I'm not a great thinker because that hasn't happened, honestly.
No, I don't see it either. So
Yeah, my worry is you might just go back into the past way of being. And I find a kind of a paradox. It's like an old song. The more things change, the more things remain the same. In one side, we've had tremendous improvement, and we are thinking about artificial intelligence. We are thinking about how computers and machines can do huge leaps and bounds of progress there. But at the same time, people are more in their own compartments, hating each other more than the past century.
Right.
Whether it is religious fanaticism, whether it is countries all wanting to make a wall around themselves, not to allow the other guys to come in.
Right.
So there is great progress happening in one side. But in many other areas, we are actually going back than what it used to be in the Renaissance or any other time in the past.
Right. We are finding these loose links, first of all, from aspiration to the agility, now to anticipation. And evidence proves that, that link is also weak. What's your perspective?
Now, you also talked about we live in a state of complexity and ambiguity. So while there are some patterns where we can anticipate, but in other area, there is also limits to our anticipation. So there is just two arguments about COVID. One is that this was clear that there would be a virus coming like this, and why didn't we anticipate? That's one argument. The second one is that we never thought a virus could come so fast and spread the globe. But once it hit us, the way vaccine development happened, in a way that just changed our all earlier paradigms around how much time we will take to make a vaccine. Traditionally, we always thought that it will take 10, 12 years. But when it hit us, when countries put their muscle around it, we were able to do it in 1 year.
I want to interrupt if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So, vaccine is still a very old world way of dealing with the threats we talk about.
Yeah.
It is not a cure, it's not a panacea, it's a temporary measure of only being able to survive against a particular virus. COVID is just one virus.
Yeah.
If the world is hit by another virus today, the world is no wiser, then the world is no better in terms of being able to deal with another one. And that has got nothing to do with the mobilization of resources to create vaccines. So we haven't solved it at any of these levels, whether it is pandemic or epidemic, even today, with multiple mutations. So this whole thing about anticipation is nothing but a cognitive process that can be put into place, which basically traces, tracks, tests, and enables you to be able to provide treatment.
So what is it that you would like the world to anticipate? Well, unless we get specific.
If I gave you a butter knife and asked you to slice a jackfruit, would you be able to do that? So anticipation is just not about your and my intelligence, but it is a collective intelligence that is manifested in a process. You don't have to do anything about it. As a leadership, you have to aspire and you have to be able to be agile. And the next step, anticipation, is this ability to put a tool, a method, a process in place.
To reach that aspiration.
To reach that aspiration. And you might or you might not, but that will continuously improve itself. Right? Why are we not doing it?
I really don't know.
Or should we do it or should we not do it?
I'm sure anybody who has an aspiration has a plan. Whether the plan works or not is a different issue. People do anticipate risk. Any organization that I work with, they would have an aspiration, they have an anticipation. Anticipation can work both ways. One, They have a positive anticipation. This new things will happen. Somebody is possibly positively anticipating that human beings will go to the space and live there.
Wishful thinking, right?
That's right. It's an anticipation. What would be an anticipation? So let's say Microsoft, what should they be anticipating?
Microsoft can anticipate in the context of products that they have today. How can they become part of a solution of how people integrate it into their daily lives?
So won't that become an aspiration?
It will have to be an aspiration from the time that we actually bought software and CDs to the time that they became available on the internet, right? They are meaningless for me because there are so many others who are offering the same word processing and accounting and everything on the basis of a free software. So why do I have to pay licenses to Microsoft? So what is the next step? The next step is, how do you now make, if you have to make this free, you can't obviously run a corporation. So I'm even talking from a very narrow ambition perspective. How can you make what you have developed useful and fused with the life of people?
Yeah. So what I understand from you is that the linkage between an aspiration and anticipation.
The solutions that we create and the life applications so that the quality of life can improve.
That's an interesting thing because technology can save you time. But do you have more time now compared to when you are not using a technology? What happened with the save time is an issue. But the ultimate goal of having more time for an individual, we haven't achieved that.
Authenticity is the fourth block of leadership. How can we make a simple individual agree to the truth and behave to the truth? Do you think it is important?
What's your definition of authenticity?
Doing things right without the fear of consequences.
Got it. Now the challenge comes is your right is not my right.
Which is why I use the word truth. There is only one version of truth.
Again, because there are multiple truths the way I perceive it. For example, if I say that sun rises in the east, it's a truth for somebody. But that's not the truth. So while from a philosophical or a spiritual or a metaphysical perspective, we can say that it's truths. I can say that this table weigh, using data, 15 kilos. But if I put this table in the moon, it is 1/6 of that. I can say this is opaque. But if I look at this with an electron microscope, it's not opaque.
Yes.
So even to get to that point, that a singular truth, look at what is the biggest challenge the world is having now. My God is the only truth and your God is not the truth.
True.
So truth is always multi-dimensional perspectives and the way I look at that. So then we may have to look at authenticity from a perspective of no need to wear a mask. It's easy to understand that. I don't have to behave like someone whom I am not. Whatever it is.
Right.
And I can say that I am seeing this truth like this, Subbu, authentically.
Right.
And you might not see that
Right.
in that way.
Right.
So I don't know, from a leadership perspective, but as a psychologist, I can agree that when you are able to share and be who you are, you sleep well at night. Whether it's helped you to succeed, I don't know.
Fire was the digital at a certain point of history on the planet. Every part of the planet had shaped their lives around this technology called fire. The Indus Valley civilization was shaped by every single human activity around fire, which is exactly what is happening around digital. Every single human activity from birth until death is being governed by digital. And this digital is nothing but data, as you rightly said, being driven from a opaque table to anything which we call IoT, sensors, scanners, wearables, and your devices. So there is a mechanism to capture data.
Oh, yes.
It's a context, and that contextualized,
Yeah.
okay, has to be systematized, which is what digital provides you an opportunity. It's a tremendous improvement if we go from zero divisibility to at least a 20% coherence. You know, this will be a much better society, a much, because that is where you start, that the divisive society that we live in, right? So
To be fair, to be authentic, the topic that you are talking, I must say that I don't know much about this. That's the only authentic statement I can make. But by the way, I'm speaking in a conference next month on AI, and I'm talking about the unconscious mind and AI.
right,
Because at the end of the day, there is a human being,
right,
and our unconscious is something that we don't know
right.
how it might influence. Yeah.
Right. So those are the biases. Whatever we are enabling the machines is with our biases. So they are not going to work independently. Our own unconscious and conscious biases without impacting how machines learn and how machines behave.
Yeah, true.
But that is not what we are creating. We are training people in mass numbers with the so-called AI and ML and digital technologies. Do you think that is enough? Or do you think that these skills have to basically have a cap on top of them, which is the context we talked about, which is the capacity you have to understand what is relevant? And I'm going to use the word relevant here because to replace the truth. And then we can basically work on the same aspect of your relevance and my relevance.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you see this trend? What is going on with the skills, or is it the capability that we need to refocus on? What do you see today enough to create that transformative society in terms of abilities? From a leadership perspective, what do you advise leaders?
I simply say two things. Leaders need to have the skill, which is, I call sensing. Because that's a skill that helped animals.
Yes.
Sense. And then to have a skill called sense making. If sensing is not correct,
Yes.
sense making will not be correct.
Yes.
If sensing is correct and sense making is not correct, action will not be correct.
Right.
So I simplify, say that, hey, am I able to sense? Am I able to make sense out of this data? Otherwise, data is just data, right?
Right.
Third, based on my sense making, collective sense making, where the issue of relevance and other things can come context, am I able to take the right action? Yeah. Any of this step goes wrong, if my sensing is wrong, sense making will not be correct. If my sense making is not correct, my actions will not be correct. So I tend to put it into three simple steps. Sensing. How do we help people to sense? Because animals have it. We lost it.
Yes.
On the way. But the more we get into digital and gadgets, our ability to sense is gone. So I now live in a 11-acre estate. I can sense things. I've gone back to that. And I need to make sense out of why this phenomena. So one of the things I've helped is the traditional old concept called system thinking, that everything is connected. They introduced some wolves in a national park in US. After 5 years, a river occurred. Now you can't connect it too directly.
Right.
How do we see this interconnectedness, which may not be visible, and make sense out of this interconnected nature of the world and act on it? That's where I would say.
Santosh, it's been a pleasure. As I said, a privilege to learn from you, and I hope that our audience will essentially also find many grains of truth, many grains of their own truth, and hopefully we will continue this dialogue. I look forward to having you back here for conversations a few more times.
I would love that.
Thank you very much. Quick to ascend and even quicker to descend is the social media blend that the leadership finds at its end. We build statues for our leaders. Why do we? Perhaps it is time that we mask all the statues like the one in the background, and we will unveil them when we are ready as a society to recognize true leadership, when we have increased the leadership quotient in our societies. There is a huge leadership deficit, and this deficit can only be bridged with leadership showing intellectual integrity. Intellectual integrity needs to be driven by a narrative that is based in science, which means data. We live in the most divisive times, and we need leadership that can bring together both sides of that divisive narrative. It could be any unit, be it a family, be it a society, be it an enterprise, be it a nation, be it the global order. We need leaders who bring those 5 qualities together: aspiration, agility, anticipation, authenticity, and only then ability. These are extraordinary times, and these times demand transformation, not incremental change. We don't need leaders with followers behind them. We need leaders at the center of action. Those leaders who can rally to causes that are critical to the very survival of our planet. We need leaders who are bold with experimentation. We need leaders who are not afraid to speak the truth. We need leaders who can lead with their hearts, not just with their minds. And leaders don't need titles. Leaders can emerge from every section of the society, and we need more of them. I hope this episode on leadership brings that understanding of how these 5 dimensions need to be harvested. They may not be available in a single person, but together as communities, we can bring this together. Thank you for watching this episode. Really grateful to Santosh Babu for spending his time, and also to my team of Siddharth Patel and Kutso Kodsa, who facilitate in the production of these episodes. If you haven't subscribed so far, please do write to FOW@giga.app. We want to hear from you. We want you to participate. We want to be able to dialogue with you. This podcast is just a primer to evolve those communities of interest and communities of practice that we want to see our societies flourish in. My next episode, #Tuesdays at 5, will feature Suhas Ramegowda, and the topic is rural livelihoods. Until then, stay safe, be happy, and try to lead.